today on corporate wellness, past, present, and future. This event is brought to you by Employee Benefit News, sponsored by Limeade. I'm Elliot Cass, and I'll be your moderator. The concept of workplace wellness has been around for quite some time now, getting started more than a century ago. But what began as factory exercise breaks in the 1800s has transformed into the game-changing high-tech wellness programs that are in place today. During this web seminar, we're going to learn a bit more about the history and evolution of corporate wellness and the advances that are taking place in our understanding of wellness and its importance. Our two presenters today are Henry Albrecht, the CEO and founder of Limeade, a corporate wellness technology company, and Dr. Michael Parkinson, the principal of P3 Health, who is the former chief medical officer at Luminos and a past president of the American College of Preventive Medicine. I'd like to remind everyone that Henry and Mike will respond directly to your questions later on in the webcast. If you have a question, please submit it by typing it into the question field on your console and then clicking submit. We really encourage everyone to do this, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we can in the time that we have available to us. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Henry Albrecht. Henry?
Thanks, Elliot, and hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great morning. Here's the agenda slide. I won't read it, but we'll go over it. And I've had the honor of working with Mike Parkinson, Dr. Parkinson, for about 10 years now, and I think the best thing we want to try to do is just make sure we keep this interactive and we keep it fun and keep it moving. So Mike's a pioneer of consumer-directed healthcare and population health. The reason I enjoy hanging out with him is he's also a super mission-driven person and truly cares about improving well-being in the world. So we'll get started, and Mike will kick us off with the timeline of corporate wellness and how we got through the last 100 years to where we are today. So, Mike?
Thank you very much, Henry, and really enjoy being with you today, as well as all of our attendees out there. It's an exciting time for wellness, but if you don't know where you've been, as is often the case, you don't know where you're going. So we thought that a quick look back at the history of wellness and wellness programs might be instructive as we look forward together as to what's coming and where the highest value on these types of programs might lie in the future. So as Elliot really said at the very beginning, companies have realized that there are benefits of vital workforce going back over 100 years. Exercise programs at the work site were thought to be very forward-thinking in the late 19th century. Companies like National Cash Register and the Pullman Company realizing that fitness at work mattered to the business of work. Moving into the 1960s, with the advent of the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, we began to see the siloing, sometimes very appropriately, of what we called wellness and health promotion, occupational medicine, safety, and quote-unquote medical care. The growing awareness that cigarette smoke created not only personal risks but corporate risks, the growing awareness of cancer and heart disease started to intermingle all of these stovepipes in a way that employers began to understand that smoking at work probably was an actual detriment to their bottom line. Ill-formed perhaps, but the concept began to emerge that we had a full facet of employee workforce needs. They somehow melded into their home health habits and personal health beliefs, and also that this thing called occupational medicine and safety was somehow related to personal health behaviors. Moving into the 1980s and 90s, we began to see focuses on the high-cost employees as healthcare became more unaffordable. These companies always focused on the pharmacy costs and the medical care costs, but it wasn't until Professor D. Addington, starting to study 30 years' worth of effort at the University of Michigan with 2 million lives, began to quantify that health behaviors actually predicted not only medical care costs, but total productivity costs. About this time, I was in the Air Force, and I became aware, as someone charged with the fitness, the readiness, the performance of the U.S. Air Force, that personal attitudes and personal behaviors had a huge impact on whether or not Air Force members were fit and ready to fight. So talking about our policies in tobacco at basic training and at mid-career training, and that whether our fitness standards could be related to chronic diseases we later saw, was very much informed by Dee's work and that 2 million cohort lives going forward. That would become crystal in my mind that a population-based approach was necessary rather than one focused strictly on the high-cost employees.
And Mike, you were also helping purchase benefits for the Air Force at that time, correct?
Absolutely, Henry.
Good point. Any observations from that process?
Well, what we found, and it ultimately led to my personal decision to begin to start this consumer-directed movement, was that as the military downsized in the late 80s and early 90s, it was quite obvious to us that we didn't deliver as much care. We had to become purchasers of care. And when we would deploy teams of our own military officers to review the proposals being brought to us by health plans, we saw a systematic underemphasis on wellness and underappreciation, frankly, of Dee Eddington's work. It typically was pay the claims, fill the prescription, and do it at the lowest unit cost without thinking about a systematic wellness strategy as part of the proposal, such that I, on my retirement from the military, thought we needed to design new types of health plans that addressed the root cause in clear and simple ways of disease, disability, death, and preventable health care costs, largely building on Dee's work. So on this slide, you can essentially see that Dee basically charged us to prevent the upward flow. How can you prevent the natural progression of risk turning into disease, which turns into cost, which turns into premature death? And as Dee would say, it wasn't until I made health an economic strategy that employers got serious about the economics of wellness. As long as it was just the right thing to do because health is a good thing, we saw no traction. But as we began to connect the dots between the health behaviors, the disease burden, the productivity cost to the bottom line of the companies, health as a serious economic strategy, we didn't see much traction. Dee's book called Zero Trends, Getting Us to Zero Trends in Healthcare Costs, really put wellness programs on the map as ways to attack not only medical care costs, but the commitment of employees to their companies. With Luminos and Definity in the early 2000s, we basically saw 100% coverage of preventive care 6 years before it was mandated in the ACA, and we also instituted incentives for health behavior change and care management support long before it became a standard in the wellness industry. These were critical times to reset the blueprint. Insurance plans then began to robust many of their wellness components and to incentivize those components in a way that made sense to employers, and we saw largely that movement till today. Now, moving forward into the early 2000s and into 2010, when the federal government said under the ACA that it not only is it good, but we encourage employers to increase the amount of incentives for wellness activities, and we allow those to be deployed in such things as healthcare exchanges, we now had codification of incentives as a viable part of any healthcare strategy. NIOSH revisited, based on a 2005 publication that I was honored to participate in, with NASA to integrate employee health so that we really have a structured approach to total productivity and performance. NIOSH created the Total Worker Health Program, which integrates health, safety, occupational medicine, and performance, reflecting the reality of what the employer listeners on this call see. There's only one bucket of money, and the more we silo employees and their families into separate buckets, the harder it is for these employees and families to take the actions that derive to total benefit to the top line of the company and the bottom line of the company, and parenthetically to their own salary and their own compensation. which have been flat for the last decade, largely due to the increase in healthcare costs. Wendy Lynch, Hank Gardner, Dee Eddington robusted their earlier work to basically say that it's not just the health behaviors of employees, but more and equally perhaps greater importance is the environment at the work site, the leadership, the culture, the structure, the processes, the policies, the compensation and benefits as a total package that frame whether or not the employee wants to take their health seriously and whether or not they're actually supported in doing so. This construct of integrating total health, safety, and performance is the dominant trend going forward that will shape how we think of wellness in the years to come. Henry?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said about the silos in compensation because I think a lot of wellness programs out there still feel siloed as well, not just in terms of how people are compensated, but also, oftentimes wellness programs feel like just benefits programs. It's only relevant once a year when you choose your insurance or choose your high deductible plan or whatever. And what you've learned and what we've learned is that if it's only a once a year transactional experience, you're not really going to reap the behavior change, the culture change, and the benefits of it. So I think what's going on now is, or in the last 5 or 6 years, say, you've seen organizations trying to include this more broadly in their business strategies. You're seeing the look, in 2006 we started work on the first whole person well-being improvement model where it wasn't just health risks. Even though we understood all the work of the pioneers before us, we were also looking at concepts like mindfulness and readiness and optimism and belief in your company and a sense of purpose in your work that weren't really part of the risk model until that date, as well as looking at cultural support from really an organizational psychology lens. Like when large companies want people to engage in work in other things besides health, what strategies do they use? How do they build skills for people? So I see it as the tech leaders, the healthcare leaders, the organizational health leaders all started kind of coming together. And I know that's met you, Mike, probably about that time, 2006 and 2007, where we appreciated the work that was being done in different realms, and they started to coalesce. And obviously there's been an explosion of really cool technology as well. Facebook and social technology, quantified self and measurable steps and heart rates and blood pressures and all the things that have gone from thousands of dollars and things you do in the hospital to things that cost $25 and you wear around your wrist every day. So that innovation is going on right now, and what we see for the next 5 years is that these different realms of marketing and healthcare and science and benefit strategy are going to continue to integrate. And this whole person well-being approach will start expanding across the whole culture of an organization. Mike once shared with me when he was at Luminos, they would have this concept of a trust audit where you would just hang out outside of a meeting. Maybe you're going to try to sell software or sell a solution to a company, and just by chatting people on the park bench in front of a building, you just get a feel for whether people trust their organization. And Mike, I think you shared with me that you could actually tell before you went into the building whether there was enough organizational trust to successfully deploy a consumer-directed health plan. Did I capture that anecdote right?
Yeah, I think the important thing here is that programs, activities, participation, outcomes, all of these words, if we're not careful, they miss the heart of what we're actually trying to engage. And that core element of commitment is built on trust that the people around me will reward me for what I do, will recognize me in a way that is meaningful to me, and that I trust that with their teamwork and with their leadership that together we're doing something that counts. This sounds a little bit like the military, but I think it's the reason that any type of enterprise that has a purposeful vision and an impactful mission succeeds when everybody deep to their core feels what that is. And it's palpable. It's visceral. You can sense it when you go into the reception area of a company, frankly. Many times we would go into companies with a totally new concept, the fact that benefits money is all the employees' money. It came totally out of the company's businesses, and that getting engaged in your health and your care decisions is core to our mission success as a company. That link was never made in most companies and still is not today. The people matter, the choices they make matter, and together we will succeed. That is what I mean by trust, that sense of passion and purpose, commitment, openness, honesty. People hunger for that, Henry, but in so many cases they don't feel it, and throwing a wellness program on top of that poor substrate, it's guaranteed not to work.
Yeah, so actually that was one thing we've also observed is that a lot of traditional health management and wellness approaches have just kind of scribbled off health management and tacked on the word well-being. There actually is a ton of interesting innovation in the well-being space right now in sleep treatments and apps for mindfulness. And there's just so much interesting work, but it's important to separate what people really mean when they say well-being. We'll get into that a little bit. And to me, it is your life at work, your life at home, your relationships with other people. It's a very broad definition. The other thing going on, I think, is there's so much innovation outside of healthcare. There's innovations in marketing and in technology and big data and machine learning and quantified self that's really coming into bear right now. That's why I say the meaningful integration with business strategy. A lot of times there are strategic insights that just didn't exist before about how health and well-being and job performance are correlated, and we'll get into some of those in a minute. And then also the connection to this big E, engagement. Not talking about engagement or participation in a wellness program, but rather the elusive engagement with which Mike just described, which is a true emotional connection to work. It's not just getting the extra mile out of your people. It's where does that come from? It comes because they care. So there have been some academic definitions of well-being. Here are a couple right now: optimal psychological functioning and experience, living the good life, happiness and actualization. But at the end of the day, it's really a more common sense concept than it feels like. It's how are you? At Limeade, we use the phrase, overall, I have well-being in my life, and then you get to score, how high that well-being is. So taking all this science of psychology and medicine and behavioral economics and boiling it down to something that your average human being gets instantly and gets how they can improve it instantly is a huge part of the challenge that companies like us are trying to address in the market. And well-being at work is taking a special, or I guess gets special focus. What we've found in our research is that well-being and work engagement are almost the same thing. We've talked about this concept of the sweet spot of stress, where stress is a good thing up until a point. Basically, stress is the same thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, excited to go to work, and thinking about the challenges of work. It's only when it's too high for too long that you burn out, or maybe when it's too low that you lose interest. But the science of engagement at work and the science of well-being we're learning are actually kind of the same science, which is really interesting. So a lot of employers who get this are looking, of course they're looking at their health costs, but they're looking far beyond that into other business metrics they can measure, and we'll get to that in a second.
Henry, let me just comment one point here. Semantics are very important. I have colleagues, and some of you might be out there on the phone, and others that we work with who feel that well-being, the term, really captures what we're looking for. I don't know if it does or not, but well-being, when it exists, is infectious. You want to be around people who have a sense of purpose, who have energy, who are able to look at the glass as more than half full, even when they're beset with adversity. It's the ability, we called in the military, to be ready. Readiness is very big in the military. Life is uncertain. Your day at work is uncertain. Your teenage son is uncertain. Being able to bounce back quickly is a skill that you can train for, that you can anticipate, and you can minimize your downtime as a human being, as a father, as a spouse, as a colleague, a coworker, supervisor. So all of these concepts on this slide about being able to bounce back, having some self-introspection, self-efficacy, these are not skills that just naturally occur. Savvy employees are beginning to help employees understand, first of all, who they are as individuals and allowing that space to happen, and then supporting them uniquely in the workplace without a lot of psychobabble, but really appreciating who they are. After all, they hired them. They thought they had the potential. Why would you underinvest in that asset once they're on board with you? So a lot of these words are thrown around. I get a little nervous when I see whole meetings on words, and we somehow miss the essence of what we're trying to do. And getting back to that, you can always be more than what you are. We all are unique individuals. We all have innate capabilities. That's the core of what wellness is, and that's the core that I think so many employers with program after program or even with apps and devices and biomonitoring aren't necessarily getting to the root cause, if you will, of what motivates people. Just a quick thought there, Henry, to throw in.
Yeah, that's great. It doesn't have to be too complicated, frankly. So I'm going to share this model of well-being. Basically, on the top, you have individual well-being. Most of the employers we work are talking about physical health, emotional well-being, work well-being, financial well-being, and how all those things are related and how they connect socially in the workplace. So having programs that are based in evidence, that have stepwise improvement approaches, and really approach the basic fundamentals of how you eat, how you move, and how you think, as you would say, Mike, or basically how well you're sleeping, how stressed you are. That's kind of the baseline for the industry of wellness. Underneath that, though, in the blue, is what we would call organizational support for well-being. And that could be as simple as, having challenges sponsored every other month by every member of your leadership team. So everyone in the company knows that you care about well-being. It could be how you train your line managers to speak about well-being when they're having one-on-one meetings or team meetings, and helping people bring their whole person to work and show a little personality and energy when they're serving customers or patients or whatever your business is. It might be policies that you have about, when someone has a sick kid, how do you do scheduling so that you can have someone cover for that person and be there for their family. Those little investments in well-being tend to repay themselves tenfold in loyalty and in that quote-unquote emotional connection to work we talked about earlier. It might even be the design of your physical environment or your cafeterias. And so organizational support is a huge part of how you shift the culture, not necessarily to a culture of health per se, but rather to a culture of whatever it is you're trying to achieve. If you're selling retail coffee, you're in the culture of engaging people and serving customers better. So the strategy is not the old culture of health. It's the culture of building an incredible business with an aligned and intentional approach. So this slide just basically says, some basic statistics about why the whole employee matters. Mike, you spent some time studying chronic disease and what causes it, and you don't need to get into every ICD-10 code to realize that basically how you eat, move, and think is driving a lot of these things. And on the right, you can see how health and personal problems are affecting behaviors or outcomes in the workplace. If you have anything to add, Mike, feel free.
Yeah, Henry, it sounds extremely simplistic, and those of us who've been in healthcare, traditional healthcare, for decades, are coming to an awareness that whether it's ICD-10, soon to become ICD-11, or DSM-4 that used to be DSM-3, better diagnoses without respect to what is the root cause of 80% of disease is not serving us well as employers, as health plans, as hospital systems, or even as parents or community members. What I eat, largely a whole food, plant-based, non-inflammatory diet with minimal amounts of processed foods, meats, dairy, which are inherently inflammatory, particularly as they are mass processed nowadays as compared to 100 years ago. These are the root cause of disease, which we don't actually see in other areas of the world until we export Western diets. Similarly, sedentary lifestyles, a lack of physical activity, which is now absolutely epidemic in our country. And finally, the self-imposed stress that comes oftentimes from too much technology. When I say how I think, what I mean is, do I understand my purpose in life? Do I have something I'm passionate about, committed to, where I can make a difference? And how do I understand my stressors? How do I respond to them in a positive learning way as opposed to tobacco, alcohol, or an abusive relationship with a spouse, family member, or colleague? What I eat, how I move, and how I think. And employers can create microsystems, policies, environments, leadership role models who behave certain ways to offset the toxic environment that our employees go back to when they see 6 drug company ads every single night on the major networks' TV news. This is a big job, but simplifying it and focusing like a laser on the root cause of preventable disease, disability, death, and total employer costs is absolutely critical, Henry. But a better understanding on the right side of this slide about the stressors and the perceptions and the alignment of multiple forces, financial status, personal work relationships, how they contribute to the root cause, that's where we're advancing the science. I see that really growing in the past 5 years, and we're going to see more of that in years to come.
Yeah, I think the financial stress is a good example of just the interoperability, the interaction between emotional health, physical health, et cetera. When you're making, low wages and you're a mother of 2 and you're having financial stresses and you don't have a car to go to the doctor and you have to get that extra shift at work, these are the real stressors, and you can realize that's not a health issue. It is a health issue, but it's way beyond that. It's a health, it's a relationship, it's a financial stress issue. It shows the interaction, and here's some great outcomes information. I'm not going to read all of these, but this is great work published by Gallup. I'm sure we've all followed some of the terrific research they've done over the years. Their sample size here is over 50,000. The 2 things I'll call out here is, first of all, kind of the obvious, 70% fewer missed work days when you have people who have both well-being and work engagement. You get great results. But the second one is 59% less likely to look for a job in 12 months. The fact is, employee turnover is going to cost you a lot more than health costs. If you have, a 10% increase in health costs won't cost you as much as a 10% increase in the number of people who quit every year because they're not engaged at work. So I think it's important to look at both of these statistics together and just see the financial impact that could have on your business. A lot of people, struggle with the ROI of these programs. The fact of the matter is all of this stuff is measurable. Every single statistic that we've talked about on this call is very measurable, and maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A section after the call. So now we're going to get into the 2 fundamental shifts we've talked about. And the first one is from this standalone wellness to integrated human performance thinking. I'll hand this over to you in a second, Mike, but I think there's a lot of thinking that if you just patch together all of your benefits in a kind of agnostic way without a point of view and hope that well-being will happen, it's not really working. I think what you need to do is use enabling technology to integrate all of your strategies around your people, but also get the strategic guidance you need to deploy those in a way that actually match your business strategy and match your business culture so that you can be a competitive global company. Mike, I'll turn it over to you, and then you'll cover shift 1, and I'll talk a little bit more in shift 2.
Sure. I think that shift number 1 undoes a little bit of the silos that we talked about in the history of wellness back in the 60s and 70s when we thought about occupational medicine. We thought about wellness in the front door. Occupational nursing was in the back of the plant. We took care of injuries without respect to the fact that stress at home probably caused the inattentiveness in the machine shop that led to the lacerated finger. We didn't really put together the whole person perspective on the top line revenue and the bottom line losses in a company. So from the corporate view, taking all of the things that touch the human being, the worker and their family, into a single health, safety, and performance perspective, the lessons learned from NASA in the 2005 Institute of Medicine report that was then codified and expanded by NIOSH in the Total Worker Health Initiative, and I encourage you all to go to their website, is that healthy employees are safe employees. Healthy employees know how to deal with stress, will not be distracted at work. Therefore, you must have a component in your EAP or in your wellness program that addresses resiliency, mindfulness, and the introspection that builds strength. It doesn't just happen. Similarly, having narrower and narrower networks with higher and higher deductibles in the absence of tools and support for patients to become more active also won't cut it, to Henry's point. So if we can demedicalize health into what I eat, how I move, and how I think in terms of my purpose and my stress and my response, by the way, they all overlay 80% of the chronic diseases that we're trying to measure and manage. They're the root cause. If we can simplify that and support the environmental choices at work, take an integrated approach to our programs so that the employee sees the quickest default pathway to doing the right thing, that's how we're going to be able to make progress. Healthcare employers in particularly are aware of this because they have oftentimes the highest healthcare costs, even with the same amount of disease in community employers of their same size. Taking passive patients and making them active care partners is now the employer's job. Many employers are using activation assessments as part of their health risk appraisals. Activated patients have better outcomes, fewer medical errors, and lower total costs, all of which go to the employer's bottom line. So employers are getting engaged in assessing and improving consumer, employee, and patient activation. Moving from wellness to health, safety, and performance in an integrated way is the mega trend, shift number one that we're seeing right now, Henry. And those companies that move there faster will see greater economic and market benefit compared to those companies that don't.
Yeah, now, Mike, I've always said that, I think you and I have spoken about this too, that really the best place to do healthcare in a lot of cases is the employer, because that's where people spend all their time, that's where all their social connections are, that's where financial and other kind of social and cultural incentives apply and get people to want to fit in or act in accordance with the culture. There's just so many great resources that employers have that, frankly, consumer-facing healthcare solutions don't have. And most people, although I think choice is a great thing and holding people accountable for being educated consumers is a huge and positive trend, at the end of the day, a little bit of nudging and a little bit of guidance and making those choices simple, having simple, great quality providers in your networks and guiding people through wellness programs to the right choices that are very personalized to them, really, I think, make employers the best place to do healthcare too.
Well, there's one other comment, Henry, on that is number one, that going back to my military roots, there's a concept called moving care forward. We use that to say moving it into the battlefield so that we move as much capability forward so we're able to save lives in that first golden hour, for example. The same principle applies to employers. If health and disease lives in the home, the work site, and the schools, moving care and caring platforms into the work site, into the schools, and into the home, now abetted by new technologies, is certainly a major wave. So we're seeing the growth of on-site clinics, but not traditional just acute care runny nose visits, not to demean those because convenience trumps all. But increasingly, they're caring platforms where we can embrace the whole individual and even open them up to family members with new technologies that allow you to do that from home. So this really is a return to some of the original wellness we saw in the 1930s at the original Kaiser shipyard, when we put clinics in the middle of the shipyard because that's where the employees were. Now, with new technologies, we can extend the on-site essentially to multiple sites and meet the convenience and cost needs of those busy employees in a way that benefits employers. Huge mega trend going on right now.
Yeah, I think you said pushing the care forward or pulling it forward. In a lot of cases in the workplace, that's getting the middle managers involved, because that's even more forward. Having great CEO support is important and critical and wonderful, but having the champion networks and having the middle managers involved is great too. So the next mega trend we'll discuss, or shift we'll discuss, is this, and then we'll just wrap up. This will be the last slide, then we'll get into some of your questions. Thanks everyone on the phone for hanging around. Is thinking differently about culture of health to building a great company. And this is a really simple equation. Follow with me, starting at the blue circle. So the best companies in the world are the ones who invest in the well-being of their people. There's a lot of great research showing that, because when they make that investment, according to our research last year with an N of over 2,000, those employees are 38% more engaged at work. Not participating more in wellness, more actually big E engaged at work. And employee engagement, there's decades of research here showing that when you're engaged at work, you're way more productive and all kinds of other good things. You're less likely to have accidents at work, etc. And when you have engaged employees, you also have great business outcomes. So your story as employers isn't just going to be our health risks are going down, our health costs are going down. Those the risks should always be going down. The costs probably depend a little bit more on supply side things like how you design your networks and how you negotiate and whether you hold people accountable for their decisions or your cost shifting or whatever. But people should be getting healthier, but the outcomes should be measurable in terms of profits. And we're working with clients on things like same-store sales when you have higher well-being, or patient satisfaction in hospitals when you have higher well-being amongst managers. So this equation is really simple. You invest in well-being, you get more engaged employees, you get better business outcomes, and frankly, if you have a great culture and great business outcomes, you're a better place to work. So this is something you can hang your hat on. I think if there's one thing to take back from the seminar or webinar we're doing today, it's this. Companies who embrace these two shifts will perform better in the market, and they'll be the types of workplaces that purpose-driven people are ready to do their best work in. So, Mike, thanks a lot. I hope we can engage with the audience on some questions.
Yeah, I agree, Henry. I think it's important for a company to think a very simple exercise. For your business, whatever you consider to be your product or your service, how can you try to assess, because it's absolutely true what Henry said, companies that win, regardless of the business that they are competing in, they do it because at the end of the day, they're people. Technology is an enabler, but people make the business hum. And if that person feels engaged, if they feel they're becoming a better self as a result of spending most of their adult work life with you, the employer, you will have a more successful company. Oh, by the way, chances are they will be eating better, moving more, and having better responses to stress, and be more actively engaged as empowered patients in their dialogue with their doctors and their healthcare systems. Now you've got, as I used to say in the military, and those of you with military experience, a full-up round, meaning a service member who is fully capable, 24/7, 365 a year, to take on the challenges that he or she is faced with. That's what we all want in an successful enterprise. See, we got questions or comments, Henry?
Elliot?
Yes, and thank you, Mike and Henry, for those really interesting perspectives. But now we're going to turn things over to our audience. They've been submitting questions throughout the webcast. If any member of the audience still has a question that they haven't submitted yet, please go ahead and do that right now. Mike and Henry will answer as many of your questions as possible in the time remaining. And with that, we're going to turn to our first question here. in your view, what role should insurance providers play in a company's overall wellness strategy?
Well, my short answer to that is, Mike, I'll go first, and I'll let you take it. My short answer is most employees in the research I've seen trust insurance providers. Just the brand trust of that industry is not particularly high. So I think the insurance plans do great chronic care programs. Their goal is obviously to reduce the medical loss ratio. They should be an integrated part of the solution because they have specific disease and care management programs that you need to route specific people into, but that ultimately employer-sponsored programs are going to be more trusted and engaging. Mike?
Well, from my multiple hats over the years I've been privileged to wear, I think Henry's absolutely right that the trusted brand is usually the brand of the employer, particularly if they walk the talk and there's that trust level there that we talked about before. So wherever possible, an insurance partner should be willing to wrap as much of its competencies in the brand of the employer, particularly the larger self-insured employers. Insurance companies are remaking themselves as we speak into business partners, and the challenge is they do have a legacy of having lower trust than the employers themselves in most businesses in most areas of the country. So I think being a savvy purchaser of health insurance plan services and even directly contracting where it makes sense with a health system to provide valued services that are easily accessible at a better perhaps cost, or at least in something that creates value for your employer, your employee base. All options are on the table. We're entering a brave new world where transparency, engagement, quality is much more front and center, and I think that creates great opportunities for health insurance plans as well as for knowledgeable and demanding, in an appropriate sense, employers.
All right, great. Let's move on to the next question. You both made a lot of references to the impact of wellness on productivity. This questioner wants to know, what type of numbers are you using to measure productivity?
Well, productivity could be self-reported measures in assessments, but ultimately we believe that the best measures of productivity are business metrics. So if you're in the healthcare business, it might be patient satisfaction or patient outcomes. If you're in the retail business, it might be sales. Productivity is measured differently in different industries. If you're in the oil and gas extraction business, it may be safety incidents or cost per extraction. So ultimately, the holy grail and the way you get real CEO level buy-in is showing correlations of well-being to those types of measures of productivity. There are some standard other ones like revenue per employee as well, but I think that's a little less direct, frankly.
Well, one of the terms that's used in the business community a lot, Henry, is, and to the questioner's point, is leading indicators. So what is a leading indicator that you're likely to see economic benefit in the productivity space? The first is, believe it or not, seems very soft, but that is the employee's attitude towards the company itself and towards the leadership of the company. That begins to improve, and that's one of the early effects of offering a creative and well-thought-out wellness program, is employees actually see that the employer really does care. And that's a real feeling. It builds that trust quotient we talked about before that's so often lacking. Then often the next indicator is some measure of presenteeism, which varies from industry to industry, but Henry just seems to be performing better today. He seems to be less distracted at work because, well, maybe he doesn't have that sinking feeling because he's eating a little better from that that tremendous dip in his blood sugar that he gets because of swings in his insulin secretion with a very, very poor diet as opposed to a better diet. Absenteeism is an early indicator long before you see the medical claims costs. The medical claim costs, typically D's work and others, 18 to 36 months later will you see tremendous potential decreases, risk-adjusted, to baseline medical spending. So I would say the attitude towards the company, presenteeism in the industry-specific space, Henry's just to work more often. His absenteeism seems to improve. He's not gone as much because he likes being at work. And then finally is going to be the medical care costs, kind of in that order.
All right, thanks. So this next question is pretty interesting. Can you elaborate on how a C-suite-led culture is more effective than incentives?
Henry, I'll start with that one.
Please do.
You know, I think my company, Luminos, we were one of the first to experiment in 2002 with the notion that incentivizing individuals to understand their health with a health risk appraisal, to understand their numbers, which despite getting physicals for years, the average employee can't tell you what their systolic blood pressure is or what their LDL cholesterol is from their primary care physician. We believe that putting incentives, some financial incentives, differentiated for employees that this is really important to know, even if we gave you, quote unquote, a health care benefit. And actually, we're the first to demonstrate that financial incentives do matter, but they matter for short-term practical steps that people need to take. And they can even persist through periods of coaching for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months, all of which get people on the right track. But as Dee Eddington would have said, people don't change behaviors. The environment changes around them to make the behavior change stick. C-suite behavior is seen every single day in the policies, the procedures, and the personal behaviors, health and otherwise, of the mid-level supervisor, the people who get promoted versus those who don't, the CFO of the company and the CEO of the company. If the CEO of the company takes an elevator 2 flights every morning and the employees see her do that as opposed to taking the flight of stairs every morning, it makes a big difference. Imagine in your company if you said, we don't do this here because that's not who we are as a company. I remember at Luminos, and I hope some of my colleagues from back then are on the phone, we don't take elevators 3 or 4 flights of stairs. Why would we give up the opportunity to get steps and conditioning in for something that is built into our workplace? So we didn't take the elevator even when our clients or prospects came to the office. They learned very quickly that our culture is one of physical activity. So eventually all incentives have to be changed. You have to move them to different activities, but if the culture is right around what I eat, how I move, and how I think and act, that's what we do here at this company. That sets the tone and is much more empowering than a wellness program with incentives in the long haul. And I don't know of any company you talk to, Henry, they're all interested in the long haul, or should be.
Yeah, I think 2 quick anecdotes to add on, and then we'll get to the next question is, when someone shows up at our office with donuts, it's okay. We don't throw them out, but everybody does look at them a little bit funny, because donuts are fine every now and then, but they're not a daily experience as I've seen them at other companies, frankly. I used to work at a company called Csuite, a great software company, and every year they would have an employee engagement survey provided by a third-party vendor. And they got 96% of people to complete that every single year, and there were no financial incentives to it. It was just crystal clear from the CEO to every VP to every line manager that that's how you give a little bit back to the organization, and the organization learns and takes action. The company's role in that is that they actually have to do something with the data. So if you just ask them every year, that rate will go from 96 to 86 to 56 unless you do something about it. So there's a reciprocal responsibility of the employer to do something with it as well. Elliot?
So this is a related question. Can you talk a little bit about some strategies to engage corporate leadership in promoting this culture of wellness? How do you get them involved?
Yeah, Mike, I'll start, and then you can tack on. I have we were speaking to a large employer, and they said, well, once I see the ROI from the health management program, then I can get my leadership involved, because then we'll have ROI. And unfortunately, that's not really the way it works, because you might have isolated success, but you're not going to have a population-wide win unless the leadership is involved from the start, or at least is willing to let you have full leeway in building the brand you're trying to build. So I would say 3 quick tips there would be, connect what you're doing to your business strategy and culture. Even if you buy, 70-80% of what you do is standard eat, move, sleep, stress management programs, tie that 20% into something that really resonates with the workforce in ways that, are the reasons they joined the company in the first place. The second thing would be make your program simple and delightful and social, have technology that meets people where they are. Just have a great technology platform. That's probably a little self-serving, but had to say it. And then lastly is the data. If you don't have great data, and it doesn't always have to be great out of the gate data, as Mike said, this is a long haul, but you have to have data that you can take action on. Hey, in our manufacturing facility, we only have 38% of the males doing their basic preventive care, and that's where we're seeing a lot of heart attacks. That's great, rich data that you can do very targeted programs and act on. You can do targeted challenges, incentives, rewards, and interventions and programs on specific subsets of your population based on that data. So just in summary, I would say cultural connection, simple, delightful programs and rules, and data.
I would just add one other thought. I recently had an opportunity to work with a large international organization that was very concerned that they offered every individual program in the book. All of them were sub-optimized, but on a checklist, they scored very well. And in talking to a lot of the employees and talking to mid-level supervisors, what I found was what we talked about earlier in this webinar. That is that the trust level was very low, that the competition among employees for advancement was very great, and that toxic combination led to lack of collaboration despite being thrown multiple benefits and programs. So as I sat down with the leadership of the benefits group, and I imagine most of our attendees today are in the benefits world with EBN, I challenged them to say, can you name 2 or 3 champions who are mid-level to senior-level managers that you just know other people admire because they've done something or they act a certain way or they walk the talk? And they said, oh, yeah, we know who those people are. I said, let's go out and talk to them one-on-one and get them to be a champion for other people around them and begin to draw concentric circles of influence. Okay, this is how change happens. It happens with people who are natural leaders or people who've become leaders through the choices they make or the way they influence people, and they're all around all of you on the phone. But they may not be in the benefits world. It's better, frankly, if they aren't. So adding to the 3 things that Henry said, I would say identify your champions, ally and align their efforts with yours, and begin incrementally to say that every good manager here exhibits these behaviors. Because frankly, here's what I also find. Many of the people who are managers probably shouldn't have been chosen to be managers if these criteria were used before they were selected. So allowing them to have some introspection, giving them support tools in a special way because they are a manager, or at times certain, the leadership of the company should say, at some point you don't have what it takes to be a manager anymore in the new world of integrated health, safety, and performance. It begins in the C-suite, it goes down through middle management, and every employee becomes a self-leader. If we give that message when we hire, when we onboard, when we promote, then the culture takes care of itself. You won't need incentives. But that's not where most of our companies are for understandable reasons. But those champions are out there. Find them, align with them.
Okay, great. Let's move on to this, again, another related question. Can you describe 3 tangible actions that employers should take to make that transition from wellness to well-being?
Yeah, I'll maybe take one, and Mike, you take one, and we'll see who fights for the third. What we do at our company is actually we have this concept of operationalizing well-being at every single touch point. Mike kind of alluded to it a second ago, but when we interview people, we're looking at well-being factors. When we hire, when we onboard, when we do performance evaluations, we always look at the what and the how. What is how you do your work, and how are you doing your work? How are you interacting with your colleagues? Are you bringing your whole self and your whole energy to work? So to me, it's thinking about the standard HR processes of, getting people to do their job and do their performance reviews and filling them out, and looking at every step you do through the lens of well-being. And it's actually not rocket science. You just add that layer into everything you do. Mike, anything to add?
I think making a bold statement to employees that we embrace you getting to know yourself and becoming a better self in a very visible way. Let me give you an example. It's one that those of you who are in the Washington, D.C. area know. Dr. Jim Kim, who is the president of the World Bank, had a large layoff of many managers, which was unheard of at the World Bank. For the most part, people came there, worked, and they stayed there forever. When asked parenthetically why the layoffs, he said rather bluntly, and I may have paraphrased it here a little bit, I can't fix their hearts. If they don't have the service gene, if they don't understand why they're at an institution like the World Bank, I can't fix that. So it's the core values, if you will, or the core values right. But after that, he took all the remaining managers and several hundred folks, and he brought in about 20 orange-robed Buddhist monks. And they spent a day in mindfulness training. And mindfulness training, in this case, begins with understanding who Henry is, understanding who Mike is. Does Henry understand who Henry is? Does Mike understand who Mike is? And why are you here? And I don't mean here physically in an office building on K Street in D.C. I mean, why do you think that you're here on Earth? What gives you meaning in your life? If you don't understand that, it's hard to make you a good manager of other people because they have their own stresses they're trying to deal with. So I think doing something that says it's okay to be you and understand yourself, and then giving them an affordable and scalable tool that helps them understand their stressors. There's many online CBT programs or stress management programs. There's actually mindfulness training. I call it positive attitude acceleration. Everybody is stressed out nowadays. It's the number one priority of the National Business Group on Health this year because stress is overwhelming people. Technology, it does have some good things about it. I personally believe it actually increases our stress. Nobody's making as much money as somebody else. Nobody is as pretty as somebody else. Nobody has as much 24/7 news feeds or on top of the information as much as somebody else. I think we need to find ways to allow people to understand themselves better in the beginning, middle, and throughout the duration of their careers, and then give them practical skills, perhaps as part of a wellness program or just their regular HR program, to understand their stressors and respond to them in a positive way. Better eating, physical activity, which, by the way, works better than most SSRIs, and yet 25% of all adult men and women are taking antidepressants or sleeping pills or anxiolytics. We have disconnected people's understanding of themselves and stress from homeschool work, and instead we medicalize them. That's what I meant before about demedicalizing health. Employers are key to this, and Dr. Jim Kim, president of the World Bank, set a big message when he said, if your core values aren't right, I can't fix them, but after that, I'm going to help you understand yourself and help you understand your reaction to stress. And that's moving to well-being.
And maybe the third thing, and this is probably how we wrap up, Elliot, and I'll turn it back over to you, is whatever you do, start now. Do what I'm going to do after this meeting. I'm going to have a meeting with one of my colleagues, and we're going to go for a walk and then measure what's working. So good luck to you all, and thank you so much for joining and sticking around till the end. Elliot?
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for this webcast on corporate wellness, and really hope that everyone found this session as valuable as I did. Of course, I'd especially like to thank Mike and Henry for taking the time and sharing their expertise and knowledge with us today, and also a special thank you to Limeade for sponsoring this event. If anyone missed any part of the presentation, you'll be able to listen to a recorded version within 48 hours on the Employee Benefit News site. My name's Elliot Cass, and on behalf of EBN and Limeade, thanks for being here with us, and have a great afternoon.